I discovered the extension cord snaking through my backyard hedge on a Tuesday morning in June, and that single orange cable would turn my quiet life in Scottsdale, Arizona, into a legal nightmare that would take months to resolve. My name is Marcus Abbott, and I had been living in the Sunset Ridge HOA community for about 3 years at that point. The neighborhood was one of those cookie-cutter developments that sprouted up in the Phoenix suburbs during the housing boom, with identical stucco houses painted in various shades of beige and tan, red tile roofs, and manicured lawns that required constant attention despite the desert climate. I worked as a software engineer for a tech company downtown, which meant I could afford the mortgage, but still felt the pinch every time the electric bill arrived during the brutal Arizona summers. That morning, I had gone outside to check on my air conditioning unit because my power bill for May had been unusually high. Almost $200 more than usual, which seemed insane even accounting for the early heat wave we had experienced. I walked around the side of my house where the AC unit sat humming away, and that is when I noticed the bright orange extension cord wedged through the bottom of the hedge that separated my property from my neighbor's yard. I followed the cord with my eyes, tracing it from where it disappeared into the hedge all the way back to an outdoor outlet on the side of my house. Someone had plugged a heavy-duty extension cord into my exterior outlet, the one I used for my lawn mower and other yard equipment. The cord was partially hidden by some decorative rocks and the hedge itself, but once I started looking, it was obvious that someone had made an effort to conceal it. My first thought was that maybe a landscaper had borrowed power without asking, but our HOA handled all the common area landscaping, and they had their own equipment. I crouched down and tugged gently on the cord. It was taut, clearly connected to something on the other side of the hedge. My neighbor on that side was Patricia Winters, the vice president of our HOA board, and possibly the most difficult person I had ever encountered in my 32 years of life. Patricia was 53 years old, divorced, and seemed to have made complaining about HOA violations her full-time occupation. She had reported me twice for leaving my trash, cans visible from the street past the designated pickup time, once for having a small oil stain on my driveway that I was already in the process of cleaning, and another time for painting my front door a shade of brown that she claimed was not approved by the HOA board, even though it absolutely was. The woman had shoulder-length blonde hair that she kept aggressively highlighted, wore velour tracksuits in various bright colors, and drove a white BMW X5 that she washed religiously every Saturday morning. I pulled out my phone and took several pictures of the extension cord, making sure to capture where it connected to my outlet and how it disappeared through the hedge. Then I walked around to the front of my house, crossed the street to get a better angle, and took more photos showing the cord's path. I needed documentation before I did anything else. Walking up to Patricia's front door felt like approaching a lion's den, but I was more angry than intimidated at that point. I rang her doorbell and waited, hearing the muffled sound of what sounded like a vacuum cleaner running inside. After about 30 seconds, the vacuum noise stopped, and Patricia opened the door wearing a hot pink tracksuit and white sneakers. "Marcus," she said, her voice already carrying that tone of annoyance she seemed to reserve specifically for me. "What can I do for you?" "Hey, Patricia. I found an extension cord plugged into my outdoor outlet, and it runs through the hedge into your yard. Do you know anything about that?" Her expression did not change, which I found unsettling. Most people would show surprise or confusion, but Patricia just looked at me with this blank, challenging stare. "I might have borrowed a little electricity for some yard work. Is that a problem? Yeah, it actually is a problem. That's my electricity that I'm paying for. You can't just take it without asking. She crossed her arms, and I saw her jaw tighten. It's just a little power, Marcus. Don't be so petty. I've been running some equipment for a project and my outdoor outlet isn't working properly. I was going to tell you about it. When were you going to tell me? And how long has this been going on? I don't appreciate your tone, Patricia said, her voice rising slightly. We're neighbors. We're supposed to help each other out, or does that concept not exist in your world? I took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. Helping each other out involves asking first. I need you to unplug the cord from my outlet right now. I'll unplug it when I'm finished with my project, which should be in a few days. Like I said, it's not a big deal. Patricia, I'm not asking. I'm telling you to unplug it now, or I'll unplug it myself. Her eyes narrowed, and she stepped forward slightly, positioning herself in the doorway in a way that felt almost aggressive. You know what, Marcus? I've tried to be patient with you. I've tried to help you understand how this community works, what the standards are here. But you seem determined to be difficult at every turn. Maybe if you spent less time worrying about a few cents of electricity and more time maintaining your property to HOA standards, we would not have these problems. My property is fine, and this has nothing to do with the HOA. This is about you stealing my electricity. Stealing. She actually laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. Oh, that's rich. You're really going to stand there and accuse me of stealing because I borrowed some power? You have some nerve. I want it unplugged within the hour, Patricia. I'm serious. Or what? You're going to report me to the HOA board. I am the HOA board, in case you forgot. I realized this conversation was going nowhere. Just unplug it, I said, turning to walk away. I'll unplug it when I'm ready, she called after me. And by the way, your lawn looks patchy in the front. You might want to address that before I have to send you another violation notice. I went back to my house, more frustrated than before. I checked the outdoor outlet, and sure enough, the extension cord was still firmly plugged in. I could have just unplugged it myself, but something told me that this situation was going to escalate no matter what I did, and I wanted to handle it properly. I called the non-emergency police line and explained the situation. The dispatcher was polite but not particularly enthusiastic. Sir, this sounds like a civil matter between neighbors. Have you tried talking to her about it? Yes, I just did. She admitted to using my electricity without permission and refuses to stop. How much electricity are we talking about? I don't know exactly, but my bill last month was almost $200 higher than normal. There was a pause. That is significant. Let me have an officer call you back, and we can see if this rises to the level of a theft complaint. I gave her my information and hung up, feeling somewhat deflated. I went back outside and, after a moment of internal debate, unplugged the extension cord from my outlet myself. I pulled out a small padlock I used for my storage shed and locked the outlet's weatherproof cover closed so the cord could not be plugged back in without removing the lock. About 15 minutes later, my doorbell rang aggressively, the sound coming in rapid, angry bursts. I opened the door to find Patricia standing there, her face flushed red. You unplugged my equipment in the middle of a job, she said, practically vibrating with anger. Do you have any idea what you just did? I stopped you from using my electricity without permission. I was running a pump for my koi pond, and now the filter system is down. If those fish die, you're going to pay for them. Get an extension cord from your own house, Patricia. Or better yet, fix your outdoor outlet. My outlet is being repaired. The electrician can't come until Friday. I needed power for a few days, that's all, but you couldn't just be a decent neighbor and help out. You never asked for help, you just took it. Because I knew you would be like this. I knew you would make a big deal out of nothing. $200 is not nothing. She blinked. What are you talking about? My electric bill. It was almost $200 higher last month than usual. How long has your cord been plugged into my house? For the first time, I saw something flicker across her face that might have been uncertainty. I just plugged it in a few days ago. I don't believe you. Are you calling me a liar? I'm saying the timeline doesn't add up. What exactly are you running off that cord? That's none of your business. It is literally my business since it's my electricity. We stared at each other for a long moment. Finally, Patricia said, "You're going to regret making an enemy of me, Marcus. I have a lot of influence in this community." Is that a threat? It's a statement of fact. Good luck with your next HOA board review. She turned and marched back to her house, leaving me standing in my doorway feeling like I had just painted a target on my back. I closed the door and immediately started documenting everything. I wrote down the date, time, and details of both conversations I had had with Patricia that day. I uploaded the photos I had taken to my cloud storage and made a backup on my computer. About 2 hours later, I received a call from Officer David Chen with the Scottsdale Police Department. He sounded young and professional as he asked me to explain the situation. I went through everything methodically, mentioning the high electric bill, finding the cord, my conversations with Patricia, and her admission that she had been using my power. And she refused to stop using it when you asked her to, Officer Chen asked. Yes. She said she would unplug it when she was ready, which she said would be in a few days. I ended up unplugging it myself and putting a lock on the outlet cover. You still have the extension cord. It's still there, going through the hedge into her yard. I just unplugged it from my side. Okay. So, technically speaking, what we have here is a potential case of utility theft, which in Arizona is covered under theft statutes. If someone knowingly uses utilities without authorization and without paying for them, it can be prosecuted as theft. The value determines whether it's a misdemeanor or felony. So this is actually illegal. Yes, it is. The issue is going to be proving the amount and duration. You mentioned your bill was about $200 higher last month. Yes, and I have the bills to prove my usual usage versus last month. That's helpful. What I recommend is this. I'm going to come out and take a report. I'll document the extension cord, photograph it, and talk to your neighbor if she's willing to speak with me. Most of the time, these situations resolve themselves once people realize that law enforcement is involved. She'll probably just apologize and agree to pay you back. You don't know Patricia, he chuckled. Trust me, I've dealt with HOA disputes before. They can get heated, but people usually calm down when they realize the potential consequences. Officer Chen arrived about 45 minutes later, driving a marked patrol car. He was indeed young, probably in his late 20s, with short dark hair and a calm, methodical demeanor. I showed him the extension cord, and he took several photos from different angles. He asked me detailed questions about when I had discovered it, what Patricia had said, and whether I had any history of conflict with her. She's the HOA vice president, and she's filed several complaints against me in the past, I explained. Minor stuff, like trash cans being visible too long or a small stain on my driveway. Nothing that actually violated HOA rules, just petty complaints. Officer Chen nodded, writing notes. And she admitted to using your electricity? Yes, directly. She said she was borrowing it and that I was being petty for caring about it. Okay, let me go talk to her. I watched from my driveway as Officer Chen walked over to Patricia's house and rang the doorbell. She answered almost immediately, and I could not hear what was being said, but I could see her body language. She started out friendly, smiling and gesturing, but as the conversation continued, her posture became more rigid and defensive. At one point, she pointed toward my house, clearly talking about me. The conversation lasted about 10 minutes before Officer Chen handed her what looked like a business card and walked back to my property. "Well," I asked. "She maintains that she only used your power for a couple of days, and that the amount would be minimal. She said you're overreacting because of a personal vendetta. However, she did admit to using your electricity without permission, which is the key element here. I'm going to file a report for utility theft. The report will go to the prosecutor's office, and they'll decide whether to file charges. What happens then? If they decide to prosecute, she'll be notified and given a court date. Given that the amount you're claiming is around $200, this would likely be charged as a Class 1 misdemeanor if they move forward. That carries potential penalties including fines, restitution, and possibly probation or community service. I don't necessarily want to ruin her life. I just want her to pay me back and stop doing this. I understand, and that's something you can express to the prosecutor if they contact you. Often in cases like this, especially for first-time offenders, the goal is restitution and making sure it doesn't happen again. But that's ultimately up to the prosecutor and, eventually, a judge." Officer Chen left, and I went back inside feeling exhausted despite it only being early afternoon. I had not expected a simple discovery of an extension cord to turn into a police report, but here we were. I pulled up my electric company's website and downloaded copies of my bills from the past 12 months. My average monthly bill from October through March had been around $130. April had jumped to $180, which made sense with warmer weather. But May had been $347, a spike that had shocked me when I received the bill. June was not over yet, but my current usage was tracking even higher. I sat at my kitchen table and did some rough math. If Patricia had started using my power in early April, she could have been drawing electricity for nearly 3 months. But what was she running that drew so much power? A simple koi pond pump should not cause that kind of spike. I needed to figure out what was actually connected to that extension cord. I went back outside and examined the cord more carefully. It was a 12-gauge outdoor extension cord rated for 15 amps, the kind used for power tools and heavy equipment. I followed it to where it disappeared through the hedge and carefully pushed aside some branches to see where it went on Patricia's side. The hedge was thick, but I could just make out that the cord ran along the ground toward her backyard. I walked around to the street and looked at Patricia's property from the front. Her house had the same basic layout as mine, just mirrored. I could not see into her backyard because of a tall wooden fence, but I noticed that one of her garage doors was open. I could see what looked like some kind of filtration system or pump setup on a workbench inside. My phone rang, startling me. It was a number I did not recognize with a local area code. I answered cautiously. "Hello, is this Marcus Abbott?" "Yes, this is Marcus." "Mr. Abbott, my name is Jennifer Walton, and I'm an assistant county attorney with the Maricopa County Attorney's Office. I'm calling about the police report filed earlier today regarding utility theft. Do you have a few minutes to talk?" I was surprised by how quickly things were moving. "Yes, absolutely. I've reviewed Officer Chen's report and the information you provided. I want to get some additional details from you about the situation. First, can you tell me about your relationship with Miss Winters prior to this incident?" I explained the history of HOA complaints and Patricia's position on the board. Jennifer asked thoughtful questions, taking notes as I spoke. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Mr. Abbott, I'm going to be straight with you. Cases like this can be complicated because they involve neighbors who have to continue living next to each other. However, the fact that Miss Winters admitted to using your electricity without permission is significant. The amount involved also moves this beyond just a minor dispute. 3 months of unauthorized use resulting in potentially hundreds of dollars in increased costs is substantial. So you're going to prosecute? I'm going to issue a summons for Miss Winters to appear in court on charges of utility theft under Arizona Revised Statute 13-1802. That's theft of utilities, which is a Class 1 misdemeanor given the amount involved. She'll be required to appear, and we'll proceed from there. I want to be clear that this process can take several months. There will be an initial appearance, probably a pretrial conference, and possibly a trial if she doesn't accept a plea agreement. What should I expect? You'll likely be called as a witness. I'll need your electric bills and any other documentation you have. The more evidence we have of the duration and amount, the stronger the case. Do you have any way to prove when the extension cord was first connected? No, I only discovered it today. That's fine. We can use your billing history to establish a pattern. The fact that Officer Chen documented the cord and Miss Winters' admission gives us a solid foundation. I'll be in touch as the case progresses. In the meantime, make sure that cord stays unplugged and keep that lock on your outlet. After hanging up, I felt a strange mixture of relief and anxiety. Relief that someone was taking this seriously, but anxiety about what this meant for my day-to-day life in the neighborhood. Patricia was vindictive on a good day, and now I had gotten her criminally charged. The next few days were tense. I did not see Patricia, but I noticed that the extension cord disappeared from the hedge. She must have retrieved it from her side. I kept the lock on my outlet and started parking my car in my garage instead of the driveway, just to avoid any potential confrontations. On Friday afternoon, I received a formal email from the HOA board. It was from Deborah Sanderson, the HOA president, and it informed me that I was being scheduled for a compliance review hearing regarding multiple alleged violations of community standards. The email listed 5 separate complaints: improper lawn maintenance, unauthorized door color, visible garage items, delayed trash can removal, and noise violations. I read through the list in disbelief. The lawn complaint was absurd because I had just had it professionally treated. The door color had already been approved by the board months ago. I never left garage items visible because I always closed my garage door. The trash can thing had happened once, and I had already been warned about it. The noise violation was completely fabricated as far as I could tell. This was retaliation, pure and simple. Patricia was using her position on the HOA board to harass me in response to the criminal charges. I immediately forwarded the email to Jennifer Walton with a note explaining that this appeared to be retaliation for my cooperation with the prosecution. She called me within an hour. "This is exactly the kind of thing that strengthens our case," she said. "It demonstrates a pattern of harassment and abuse of authority. Make sure you document everything related to these HOA complaints. Respond to them professionally and factually, but don't let them bully you into dropping the charges." Can she do this? Use the HOA against me like this? Unfortunately, HOA boards have a lot of discretionary power. However, if we can show that she's abusing that power for personal retaliation, it could factor into her sentencing if she's convicted. It also might give you grounds for a civil suit against her personally, though that's outside my jurisdiction. The compliance review hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday evening at 7 p.m. in the HOA clubhouse. I spent the weekend preparing my defense. I printed out copies of all my previous correspondence with the HOA, including the approval for my door color. I took fresh photos of my lawn, my garage, and every angle of my property to show that it was in compliance. I even pulled my trash can schedule and cross-referenced it with collection days to prove I was following the rules. Tuesday arrived, and I drove to the clubhouse feeling like I was heading into battle. The clubhouse was a modest single-story building near the community pool, with a large multi-purpose room that the board used for meetings. When I arrived, I found Patricia and Deborah already seated at a table at the front of the room, along with another board member named Frank Morrison, who served as treasurer. Deborah was in her early 60s, with short gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses. She had always been polite but distant in our previous interactions. Frank was probably in his 50s, balding, with a paunch and a perpetual expression of mild boredom. "Good evening, Marcus," Deborah said formally as I took a seat in one of the folding chairs facing the board table. "Thank you for coming. We're here to discuss several compliance issues that have been brought to our attention regarding your property." I noticed that Patricia would not make eye contact with me. She sat with her arms crossed, staring at some papers in front of her. "Before we begin," I said, "I want to state for the record that I believe this hearing is retaliatory in nature. Miss Winters and I are currently involved in a legal matter, and these complaints appeared immediately after that matter escalated." Deborah frowned. "Marcus, this board takes all compliance issues seriously, regardless of any personal matters between residents. These complaints were filed through proper channels. Who filed them? The complaints are confidential. Let me guess. They all came from Patricia." Patricia finally looked at me, her expression icy. "I file complaints when I observe violations. That's part of my responsibility as vice president. The fact that you're involved in multiple violations is not my fault. These aren't violations, and you know it." Deborah held up a hand. "Let's go through each complaint one at a time. First, regarding lawn maintenance. Miss Winters reported that your front lawn shows signs of neglect with brown patches and uneven growth." I pulled out my phone and showed them photos I had taken that morning. "My lawn was professionally treated last week by Desert Green Landscaping. I have the receipt. Any brown patches are from the treatment settling in, which is normal and temporary. The lawn is healthy and in compliance." Deborah studied my photos and made a note. "Okay. Next, the door color. The complaint states that your front door is not an approved color per HOA guidelines." I handed her a printed copy of the email I had received 9 months ago from the HOA management company approving my door color selection. As you can see, the color was explicitly approved. The email is dated September 15th of last year, and I have not repainted since then. Patricia shifted in her seat, and I saw her jaw clench. Deborah looked at the email and nodded slowly. "This does appear to be approved. Frank, do we have this in our records?" Frank shrugged. "I can check, but if he has approval in writing, that should settle it." "Moving on," Deborah said, though her tone had become slightly less formal. "The complaint about visible garage items. It states that you frequently leave your garage door open with equipment and storage items visible from the street." "I do sometimes have my garage door open when I'm actively working on something, but I always close it when I'm done. I've never left it open overnight or for extended periods." The HOA rules state that garages should not be used as primary storage with doors open consistently, which I'm not doing. Having your garage door open while you're home and working is not a violation. Deborah made another note. I could see her becoming less convinced by Patricia's complaints with each item we discussed. "The trash can removal complaint," Deborah continued. You were already warned about this previously. The complaint states it's happened multiple times since then. It happened once, I was warned, and it has not happened since. If there's a claim that it's happened multiple times recently, I'd like to see specific dates because that's false. Patricia spoke up, her voice tight. I've observed your trash cans visible from the street on multiple occasions past the pickup time. Then you should have documented those dates, taken photos, and included them in the complaint. Without that documentation, this is just an unsubstantiated accusation. Are you calling me a liar? Patricia's voice rose. I'm saying that accusations require evidence. I have evidence that my property is in compliance. Where's your evidence that it's not? Deborah cleared her throat. Marcus makes a valid point. In the future, complaints should be accompanied by photographic evidence and specific dates. Let's move to the final item, noise violations. The complaint states that you've been causing excessive noise during prohibited hours. What kind of noise and when specifically? Patricia leaned forward. Loud music, power tools, you name it. Multiple times late at night and early in the morning. Again, I'd like to see specific dates and times. I work regular business hours and don't do yard work before 8 a.m. or after 6 p.m., which is well within the allowed times in our HOA rules. I don't play loud music. This is completely fabricated. This is ridiculous, Patricia said, standing up abruptly. You're just going to let him sit here and claim everything is fine when we have multiple complaints. Patricia, please sit down, Deborah said firmly. Marcus, do you have anything else to add? Yes. I want to formally request that all of these complaints be dismissed and that the board consider whether Miss Winters is filing frivolous complaints as a form of personal harassment. This is affecting my ability to peacefully enjoy my property. Deborah and Frank exchanged glances. Deborah sighed. We'll take this under advisement and provide you with a written response within 10 business days. If any of these issues are found to be valid violations, you'll be given specific remediation steps and timelines. If not, the complaints will be dismissed. And what about the pattern of harassment? We'll address that internally, Deborah said, her tone making it clear the meeting was over. I left the clubhouse feeling somewhat vindicated but still frustrated. Patricia had stormed out immediately after Deborah closed the meeting, and I had seen her in the parking lot on her phone, probably complaining to someone about how the hearing had gone. 2 weeks passed. I received a letter from the HOA board dismissing all 5 complaints due to lack of evidence and finding that my property was in full compliance with community standards. The letter was signed by Deborah and Frank, but notably not by Patricia. There was no mention of the harassment issue I had raised. During those same 2 weeks, I received a notice in the mail from the Maricopa County Justice Court informing me that Patricia Winters had been formally charged with theft of utilities, and that a pretrial conference was scheduled for July 18th. I was listed as the primary witness for the prosecution. My electric bill for June arrived, and while it was still higher than my pre-April average, it had dropped significantly from May and June. Without Patricia siphoning power, my usage had returned to more normal levels. I calculated that she had cost me approximately $550 over the 3-month period based on the differences in my bills. I sent this calculation along with copies of all my electric bills to Jennifer Walton. She thanked me and said the information would be helpful in establishing restitution amounts. On July 18th, I arrived at the Scottsdale Justice Court building at 8:30 in the morning. The building was modern and clean, with metal detectors at the entrance and a directory listing various courtrooms. Patricia's case was assigned to courtroom 3. I found Jennifer Walton in the hallway outside the courtroom. She was in her late 30s with dark hair pulled back in a professional bun, wearing a gray suit. She greeted me with a firm handshake. "Good morning, Marcus. How are you holding up?" "I've been better. I keep wondering if I'm doing the right thing." "You are." What she did was theft, plain and simple. The amount involved is significant, and her refusal to take responsibility or make it right justifies prosecution. "Have you had any further contact with her?" "No. She avoids me completely now." The HOA board dismissed all her complaints against me, which probably made her even angrier. "Good. Let's see what happens today. This is just a pretrial conference, so there won't be a trial yet. Both sides will have a chance to discuss possible resolutions. The judge will probably encourage a plea agreement." We entered the courtroom and took seats on the prosecution side. The room was smaller than I expected, with maybe 20 rows of benches, a judge's bench at the front, and tables for the attorneys. Several other cases were on the docket before Patricia's, so we waited as the judge worked through them. Patricia arrived about 10 minutes later with an attorney, a middle-aged man in an expensive-looking navy suit. They sat on the opposite side of the courtroom, and Patricia still refused to look in my direction. Her attorney had a leather briefcase and an air of confidence that made me nervous. When Patricia's case was called, we all stood and approached the appropriate tables. The judge was a woman in her 50s with graying brown hair and reading glasses perched on her nose. Judge Linda Martinez, according to the nameplate on her bench. "Good morning," Judge Martinez said. "We're here for the pretrial conference in the matter of State of Arizona versus Patricia Winters, case number JC 2026-8473. Miss Walton, you're representing the state." "Yes, Your Honor." "And counsel for Miss Winters." The attorney in the navy suit stepped forward. "Robert Garrison for the defendant, Your Honor." "Very well. This is a charge of theft of utilities, Class 1 misdemeanor. Miss Walton, can you summarize the state's case?" Jennifer gave a concise summary of the facts, mentioning the extension cord, Patricia's admission to Officer Chen, and the financial impact on my electric bills. She stated that the state was seeking restitution of $550 plus penalties as appropriate for a Class 1 misdemeanor conviction. Judge Martinez turned to Mr. Garrison. "What's the defense's position?" "Your Honor, my client acknowledges that there was a misunderstanding regarding the use of electricity from the complainant's property. However, she contends that the amount involved was minimal, that she intended to compensate the complainant, and that this matter has been blown out of proportion due to a personal dispute between neighbors. We believe this is a civil matter that should not have resulted in criminal charges." "A misunderstanding," Jennifer interjected. "Your Honor, the defendant admitted to Officer Chen that she was using the victim's electricity without permission. She refused to stop when asked directly. This isn't a misunderstanding, it's intentional theft." Judge Martinez held up a hand. "I've read the report. Miss Winters, you're welcome to make a statement if you wish." Patricia stood, and for the first time I saw her look genuinely nervous. "Your Honor, I made a mistake. My outdoor outlet was broken, and I needed power for my koi pond filtration system. I didn't think it would be a big deal to borrow some electricity from my neighbor for a few days until my electrician could fix my outlet. I was planning to offer to pay him back, but before I could, he called the police and started this whole thing. We've had issues in the past because of HOA matters, and I think he saw this as an opportunity to cause trouble for me." "Miss Winters," the judge said, "did you ask Mr. Abbott's permission before using his electricity?" "No, Your Honor, but did you tell him you were using it before he discovered it himself?" No, but I explained when he asked. And when he asked you to stop, did you stop? Patricia hesitated. I told him I would when I was finished with my project. Judge Martinez removed her glasses and looked at Patricia directly. So you took something that didn't belong to you without asking. You didn't tell the owner, and when he discovered it and asked you to stop, you refused. That's not a misunderstanding, Miss Winters. That's theft. Patricia's attorney jumped in. Your Honor, my client is willing to make full restitution and cover any costs. We'd like to discuss a resolution that avoids a criminal conviction. What's the state's position on that? The judge asked Jennifer. Your Honor, while we appreciate the offer of restitution, the state believes that Miss Winters's conduct warrants more than just paying back what she stole. She abused her position as HOA vice president to retaliate against Mr. Abbott when he reported her crime. She filed multiple false complaints against him in an apparent effort to harass him. This shows a pattern of behavior that needs to be addressed through the criminal justice system. Judge Martinez nodded slowly. Mr. Garrison, is your client prepared to enter a plea today? We'd like some time to discuss options, Your Honor. All right. I'm going to continue this matter for 30 days to allow for negotiations. However, I want to make something clear to Miss Winters. The judge looked directly at Patricia. If this case goes to trial and you're convicted, I will take into account any retaliatory behavior toward Mr. Abbott in determining your sentence. I strongly encourage you to work out a resolution with the state. Miss Walton, please provide defense counsel with your settlement parameters. We were dismissed, and as we filed out of the courtroom, I heard Patricia's attorney speaking to her in low, urgent tones. Jennifer guided me to a small conference room down the hall. That went well, she said. The judge clearly sees through the defense's arguments. I'm going to offer them a plea agreement. Guilty plea to theft of utilities, probation for 1 year, restitution of $550 and 200 hours of community service. If they don't accept it, we go to trial and she risks a harsher sentence. What if they say no? Then we go to trial, and I'm confident we'll win. Her admission to the officer combined with the documented extension cord and your billing records make this a strong case. The judge's comments today also suggest she's not buying the defense's narrative. Over the next 3 weeks, I heard nothing directly about the case, but I noticed changes in the neighborhood. Patricia stopped attending HOA board meetings, according to an email update from Deborah. The board announced that they were reviewing their complaint procedures to ensure all allegations were properly documented and substantiated before compliance hearings were scheduled. I also noticed that Patricia's house seemed quieter. Her car was gone a lot, and when I did see her, she looked stressed and exhausted. I almost felt bad for her, but then I remembered how she had treated me and how she had refused to simply apologize and make things right when she had the chance. In mid-August, Jennifer called me with an update. We have a deal. Patricia Winters has agreed to plead guilty to theft of utilities. The terms are 1 year of supervised probation, restitution of $550 to be paid within 90 days, 150 hours of community service, and she has to resign from the HOA board. The sentencing hearing is scheduled for August 25th. She agreed to all that. Her attorney advised her that going to trial was too risky. The judge made it clear she wasn't sympathetic to the defense's position. This way, Patricia avoids jail time and gets to complete the sentence without it being elevated to a more serious charge, but she will have a criminal conviction on her record. The sentencing hearing was quicker than I expected. I sat in the courtroom as Patricia stood before Judge Martinez and formally entered her guilty plea. The judge asked her several questions to ensure she understood what she was pleading guilty to, and that she was doing so voluntarily. Patricia answered in a quiet, subdued voice, a stark contrast to her usual aggressive confidence. When it came time for sentencing, Judge Martinez delivered her ruling with a stern expression. "Miss Winters, you have pleaded guilty to theft of utilities, a Class 1 misdemeanor. This court finds that your conduct was intentional and that you showed a lack of respect for your neighbor's property rights and the law. You will be sentenced to 1 year of supervised probation, during which time you will complete 150 hours of community service. You will pay restitution to Mr. Abbott in the amount of $550 within 90 days. You are also ordered to have no contact with Mr. Abbott except for necessary HOA business, and you are to resign from your position on the HOA board immediately." The judge paused and looked directly at Patricia. "I want to be clear about something, Miss Winters. If you violate any terms of your probation, if you fail to complete your community service, if you fail to pay restitution, or if you engage in any retaliatory conduct toward Mr. Abbott, you will be brought back before this court, and I will not hesitate to impose jail time. Do you understand?" "Yes, Your Honor," Patricia said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Good. Court is adjourned." I left the courthouse feeling a complex mixture of relief, vindication, and exhaustion. The entire process had taken 3 months from the day I discovered the extension cord to this moment. 3 months of stress, anger, documentation, court appearances, and constant tension. Jennifer walked out with me. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Tired," I admitted. "But I'm glad I went through with it." She needed to be held accountable. "You did the right thing." Too many people let this kind of behavior slide because they don't want the hassle. But that just enables people like Patricia to keep taking advantage of others. I drove home through the scorching Arizona afternoon, the August heat making the air shimmer above the pavement. When I pulled into my driveway, I sat in my car for a moment, looking at my house and thinking about everything that had happened. 2 weeks later, I received a check in the mail from Patricia Winters for $550. There was no note, no apology, just the check. I deposited it and used the money to pay down my credit card, which I had used to cover the unexpectedly high electric bills while the case was pending. Patricia's house went on the market in September. I learned from Deborah that Patricia had decided to move to Temp to be closer to her daughter. The resignation from the HOA board had been embarrassing for her, and several neighbors had learned about the criminal case, making her uncomfortable in the community. I felt a pang of something, maybe not quite sympathy, but an acknowledgement that her life had been significantly impacted by her own choices. She had stolen from me, refused to make it right, retaliated against me, and forced me to take legal action. But the consequences had been real and lasting for her. A young couple with a baby bought Patricia's house in October. They were friendly and normal, waving when they saw me and respecting boundaries. It was a relief to have neighbors who understood basic decency. The new HOA board, with Patricia gone and Deborah remaining as president, implemented new policies requiring photographic evidence for all complaints and establishing an appeals process for residents who felt they were being unfairly targeted. Frank Morrison stepped down as treasurer, and 2 new board members were elected, who seemed genuinely interested in maintaining community standards without petty harassment. My life returned to normal, more or less. I still worked from home several days a week, maintained my lawn, paid my electric bills, which were back to reasonable levels, and enjoyed the Arizona sunshine. But I had learned important lessons about standing up for myself and not letting people take advantage just because confrontation is uncomfortable. I thought about Patricia sometimes, wondering how her probation was going and whether she had completed her community service. I hoped she had learned something from the experience, that maybe having consequences for her actions would make her think twice before treating other people as tools for her convenience. In December, almost 6 months after the sentencing, I received a letter in the mail. It was from Patricia, forwarded through her attorney's office so she wouldn't violate the no-contact order. The letter was short and handwritten. "Marcus, I am writing this because my probation officer suggested I take accountability for my actions in a more complete way than I did in court. What I did was wrong. I took your electricity without asking. I refused to stop when you confronted me, and then I tried to use my HOA position to punish you for reporting me. I was angry and embarrassed, and I handled everything in the worst possible way. I've spent the past 6 months doing community service at a local food bank, which has given me a lot of time to think about how I treat other people. I'm not asking for your forgiveness, and I understand if you want nothing to do with me. But I wanted you to know that I recognize what I did and why it was wrong. I hope you're doing well." Patricia, I read the letter several times, looking for any hint of insincerity or hidden agenda. But it seemed genuine, just a simple acknowledgement of wrongdoing and an apology. I decided not to respond. The no-contact order was still in effect, and besides, I didn't need to give her closure. But I kept the letter in a drawer in my office, a reminder of the entire ordeal and how it had ended. Life in Sunset Ridge HOA continued peacefully. My grass grew, my air conditioning ran, and my electric bills reflected only my own usage. I never had to worry about someone stealing from me again, at least not in that particular way. The experience had changed me in subtle ways. I was more vigilant about my property, more willing to stand up for myself immediately rather than hoping problems would resolve on their own, and more aware of how people in positions of minor authority could abuse that power if left unchecked. The story became something of a legend in the neighborhood. New residents would eventually hear about the HOA vice president who went on probation for stealing electricity, and it served as a cautionary tale about respecting your neighbors and following the rules that everyone else had to follow. Deborah told me once, months later, that the board had received far fewer frivolous complaints since Patricia's case became public knowledge. People understood that there were consequences for abusing the system. I never saw Patricia again after the sentencing hearing. Her daughter had helped her move, and from what I heard through the neighborhood grapevine, she was trying to rebuild her life in Temp with a lower profile. I hope she succeeded. Holding people accountable doesn't mean wishing them eternal misery. It just means making sure they face appropriate consequences for their actions and hopefully learn from them. On a warm evening in January, almost exactly 7 months after Patricia's sentencing, I was sitting on my back patio with a beer, watching the sun set over the desert landscape beyond my neighborhood. The sky was turning brilliant shades of orange and pink, and the temperature was finally dropping to something comfortable after another hot day. My phone buzzed with an email notification. It was from the Maricopa County Attorney's Office, a form letter informing me that Patricia Winters had successfully completed all terms of her probation, and that the case was now closed. She had finished her community service, paid the full restitution, and complied with all probation requirements. The no-contact order was lifted, though I had no intention of reaching out to her. I deleted the email and went back to watching the sunset, feeling a sense of finality. The whole ordeal had lasted nearly 8 months from discovery to resolution, but it was truly over now. My electricity was my own. My HOA was functioning properly, and my neighborhood was peaceful. The extension cord that had started everything was long gone, but I still kept that padlock on my outdoor outlet. Not because I thought anyone would try to steal my power again, but as a reminder that sometimes you have to protect what's yours and stand up for yourself, even when it's difficult and uncomfortable. Especially then. As darkness fell and the stars began appearing in the clear desert sky, I finished my beer and went inside, locking the door behind me and feeling genuinely at home in my house for the first time in months. The battle was over, justice had been served, and life could finally move forward. Sometimes that's the best ending you can hope for. Not dramatic or particularly satisfying, just a return to normal with lessons learned and boundaries respected. The electric meter on the side of my house hummed quietly, measuring only my usage, exactly as it should be. And that simple fact, that basic restoration of what was right and fair, felt like victory enough.